In the opulent drawing rooms of New York's Fifth Avenue mansions during the Gilded Age of 1895, marriages were business transactions disguised as romance. When 17-year-old Vivienne Ashford was informed that her mounting family debts would be settled through her union with the notorious Duke of Ravenshollow, a British nobleman seeking American wealth, she believed her fate was sealed. But as the wedding ceremony reached its climactic moment, the Duke's unexpected words would shatter every assumption about power, ownership, and the true nature of freedom in a world where women were treated as mere property. The morning light filtered through the elaborate stained glass windows of the Ashford mansion, casting jeweled patterns across the Persian rugs that had once symbolized the family's prosperity. Vivienne Ashford stood before her bedroom mirror, her reflection revealing a young woman of ethereal beauty, porcelain skin that had never known manual labor, auburn hair that cascaded in perfect ringlets, and emerald eyes that held an intelligence her society deemed unnecessary in a woman. At 17, she possessed the refined elegance that New York's elite had cultivated for generations. Yet beneath her composed exterior lay a spirit yearning for something beyond the gilded confines of her predetermined existence. "Miss Vivienne, your father requests your presence in the library," announced Martha, the elderly housekeeper whose weathered hands trembled slightly as she delivered the message. The woman's eyes held a sympathy that spoke volumes about the conversation awaiting downstairs. The Ashford Library, once her sanctuary filled with leather-bound volumes and the scent of aged paper, now felt suffocating as Vivienne entered to find her father, Charles Ashford, pacing behind his mahogany desk. His once proud shoulders sagged under the weight of financial ruin, and his greying hair seemed to have whitened overnight. Beside him stood her stepmother, Cordelia, a woman whose beauty had long since been overshadowed by her calculating nature, and whose presence always brought an air of cold ambition to any room. "Vivienne, my dear," Charles began, his voice heavy with resignation, "we must discuss your future. Our family's circumstances have changed considerably." The young woman took her seat in the wing-back chair that had been her mother's favorite, drawing strength from the memory of the woman who had filled this house with warmth before consumption claimed her 5 years prior. "What circumstances, father?" Cordelia stepped forward, her silk dress rustling with each calculated movement. "Your father's investments in the railroad expansion have failed catastrophically. We face complete financial ruin unless immediate action is taken." "The Duke of Ravenshollow has made an offer," Charles continued, unable to meet his daughter's eyes. "He seeks an American bride with proper breeding, and in exchange he will settle our debts entirely. The arrangement would secure not only our family's survival, but also elevate our social standing beyond anything we could achieve otherwise." Vivienne felt the blood drain from her face as the implications settled upon her like a heavy shroud. "You speak of marriage, father, but this sounds more like a business transaction." "All marriages among our class are business transactions, my dear," Cordelia interjected with practiced coldness. "The Duke is a man of considerable wealth and title. You would become a duchess, living in luxury beyond imagination. But what of love? What of choice?" Vivienne's voice barely rose above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a lifetime of romantic dreams nurtured by the novels she read in secret. Charles finally looked at his daughter, and she saw in his eyes the death of the man who had once promised her the world. "Love is a luxury we can no longer afford, Vivienne. The Duke arrives next week to finalize the arrangements. The wedding will take place within the month." As her father's words echoed in the vast library, Vivienne felt the walls of her golden cage closing in around her. Outside the tall windows, she could see the bustling streets of New York, where people moved freely according to their own will, while she remained trapped by circumstances beyond her control and expectations that felt heavier than iron shackles. That evening, as she sat in her room overlooking the gas-lit avenue below, Vivienne wondered what manner of man this Duke might be. and whether her life was truly destined to become nothing more than a commodity in the grand marketplace of high society. Little did she know that her assumptions about power, ownership, and her own worth were about to be challenged in ways she could never imagine. The Duke of Ravenshollow arrived on a Tuesday morning that seemed to mock the gravity of the occasion, with its brilliant sunshine and crisp autumn air. From her bedroom window, Vivian watched as an elaborate black carriage, adorned with gilded crests and pulled by 4 magnificent stallions, came to a halt before the Ashford mansion. The vehicle itself spoke of old-world wealth and power that dwarfed even the most ostentatious displays of New York's nouveau riche. The man who emerged from the carriage commanded attention in a way that made Vivian's breath catch in her throat, though not from admiration. Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Ravenshollow, possessed the kind of austere handsomeness that belonged in marble statues. Sharp cheekbones, steel-grey eyes, and dark hair that showed premature silver at the temples, despite his apparent age of 32. His movements carried the fluid grace of a predator, and even from her distant vantage point, Vivian could sense an aura of controlled danger that seemed to emanate from his very being. "He's quite striking, isn't he?" Cordelia's voice startled Vivian from her observations. Her stepmother had entered the room without announcement, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a successful negotiation. "Your father is already receiving him in the drawing room. You're to join them in precisely 15 minutes, wearing the blue silk dress we selected yesterday." As Vivian descended the grand staircase 15 minutes later, her heart hammered against her ribs with each step. The blue silk dress, chosen specifically to complement her eyes, felt like armor that provided no actual protection. The sound of masculine voices drifted from the drawing room, her father's nervous laughter punctuating what appeared to be a one-sided conversation. "Ah, Vivian," Charles announced as she entered, his relief at her punctual appearance evident in his voice. "Allow me to present His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshollow. Your Grace, my daughter, Miss Vivian Ashford." The Duke rose from his chair with fluid precision, his grey eyes conducting what felt like an appraisal rather than a greeting. When he took her gloved hand and brought it to his lips in the traditional gesture, Vivian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather outside. "Miss Ashford," his voice carried the cultured tones of British aristocracy, each word precisely enunciated. "Your reputation for beauty precedes you, though I confess the reality surpasses even the most generous descriptions." "Your Grace," Vivian replied, executing a perfect curtsy while fighting the urge to snatch her hand away from his lingering grasp. "You honor us with your presence." "Indeed," the Duke continued, his eyes never leaving her face as he studied her with the intensity of a collector examining a particularly fine piece of art. "I trust your father has explained the nature of my proposal?" The directness of his question caught Vivian off guard. In her world, such matters were typically discussed through layers of euphemism and social niceties. "He has mentioned your interest in forming an alliance between our families." A smile played at the corners of the Duke's mouth, though it never reached his eyes. "How diplomatically phrased. Yes, an alliance. Your father's financial difficulties require immediate resolution, and I find myself in need of a wife who can provide the American connections necessary for my business ventures." A mutually beneficial arrangement. The casual way he discussed her future, as if she were merely another asset to be acquired, sent a flash of anger through Vivian's carefully maintained composure. "And what role am I to play in this arrangement, Your Grace?" "Why, the role of a duchess, naturally," he replied, settling back into his chair with the confidence of a man accustomed to having his desires fulfilled without question. "You will grace my estates in England, provide me with heirs, and serve as my representative in American society when business requires my presence here. In return, you will enjoy a life of luxury and social prominence that few women could ever dream of achieving." Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly recognizing his daughter's growing tension despite her outward calm. Perhaps we might discuss the specific arrangements privately, Your Grace, while Vivian becomes better acquainted with the prospect. Nonsense. The Duke waved dismissively. Miss Ashford is to be my wife. She should understand exactly what that entails from the beginning. Transparency prevents future misunderstandings. For the next hour, Vivian sat in increasingly horrified silence as the Duke outlined his expectations with the methodical precision of a military commander. She would be expected to abandon her American friendships, adopt English customs entirely, and submit to his judgment in all matters of importance. Her education, which she had always treasured, would be redirected toward more appropriate pursuits, such as household management and social entertaining. Most chilling of all, he spoke of her future children as if they were investments in his legacy, rather than human beings to be loved and nurtured. I believe in clear hierarchies, Miss Ashford, the Duke explained, his grey eyes fixed upon her with unwavering intensity. A wife who understands her position and accepts it gracefully creates a harmonious household. Those who resist such natural order find themselves quite uncomfortable. The threat in his words was subtle but unmistakable, and Vivian felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. This was not merely an arranged marriage. It was a form of elegant imprisonment, dressed in silk and jewels, but no less confining than iron bars. "When would you expect the ceremony to take place, Your Grace?" Charles asked, his voice betraying his eagerness to conclude the arrangement before any complications could arise. "Within the fortnight," the Duke replied without hesitation. "I have business matters in London that require my attention before the winter season begins. The wedding will be a modest affair. I see no need for excessive celebration when the union serves primarily practical purposes." As the afternoon wore on, Vivian found herself studying the Duke's face, searching for any hint of warmth or genuine feeling beneath his polished exterior. She observed the way he spoke to her father with barely concealed condescension, how his eyes grew cold when discussing anything that might challenge his authority, and how he seemed to view her not as a person, but as a particularly valuable acquisition. When the Duke finally took his leave, promising to return the following day to finalize the legal arrangements, Vivian remained seated in the drawing room long after his carriage had disappeared down Fifth Avenue. The silence that followed his departure felt heavy with unspoken fears, and the weight of a future that seemed to stretch before her like a prison sentence. "He seems quite decisive," Charles offered weakly, clearly struggling to find positive aspects of their visitor. "He's exactly what we need," Cordelia declared with satisfaction. "A man of purpose and authority. Vivian will learn to appreciate his strength of character." But as Vivian finally rose from her chair and made her way back to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just met not a husband, but a captor who wore his cruelty like a perfectly tailored suit. The golden cage of her privileged life was about to be exchanged for something far more sinister, and she had no idea how to escape the fate that seemed to be closing around her with each passing hour. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, Vivian wondered if this was how all women felt on the eve of their transformation from daughters to wives, or if the cold dread that filled her heart was a warning of something far more dangerous than a simple loveless marriage. The morning after the Duke's visit dawned grey and oppressive, as if the very sky reflected Vivian's inner turmoil. She had barely slept, her mind churning with the implications of everything she had witnessed in that drawing room. The Duke's cold calculation, his casual dismissal of her autonomy, and the way he had spoken of her future as if she were merely an object to be acquired, all of it left her feeling trapped in a nightmare from which she could not wake. A soft knock at her bedroom door interrupted her brooding thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Martha with her morning tea. Instead, a woman she had never seen before entered the room. Tall and elegant, with silver-streaked auburn hair swept into a sophisticated chignon, the stranger possessed an air of quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. Her traveling dress was impeccably tailored but practical, suggesting someone accustomed to independence rather than idle luxury. Most striking were her eyes, the same emerald green as Vivian's own, but filled with a wisdom and strength that spoke of a life lived on her own terms. "You must be Vivian," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested extensive travel. "I am Agatha Ashford, your father's sister, though I suspect he's mentioned me rarely, if at all." Vivian rose from her window seat, her curiosity overriding her surprise. "Aunt Agatha? But father said you were—" "That is, we were told you had chosen to live abroad indefinitely." A knowing smile crossed Agatha's features as she moved further into the room, her keen eyes taking in every detail of her niece's appearance. "Your father has always had a talent for creative interpretations of the truth. I have indeed lived abroad, in Paris, Vienna, Rome, and a dozen other cities where a woman of independent means can pursue her interests without the suffocating constraints of American society's expectations." "Independent means?" Vivian asked, fascinated despite her emotional exhaustion. "Your grandfather was more progressive than your father, my dear. He left me a considerable inheritance in my own name, along with the freedom to use it as I saw fit." Agatha settled into the chair beside Vivian's writing desk, her movements graceful and purposeful. "I've spent the last 15 years studying art, supporting worthy causes, and living precisely as I choose. It's a luxury few women of our class ever experience." The implications of her aunt's words sent a thrill of possibility through Vivian's chest, followed immediately by the crushing weight of her current circumstances. "How wonderful that must be," she said quietly, "to have such freedom of choice." Agatha's expression grew serious as she studied her niece's face. "Martha sent word to me about your father's arrangement with the Duke of Ravenshollow. I took the first ship from Le Havre the moment I received her letter. You know about the engagement?" Vivian felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed that her humiliating situation had become a matter of international correspondence. "I know enough," Agatha replied firmly. "I also know that you have options, though your father and stepmother would prefer you remain ignorant of them." Before Vivian could respond, the sound of raised voices drifted up from the floor below. Charles's nervous tenor was clearly audible, along with Cordelia's sharp interjections and a third voice that made Vivian's blood run cold. The Duke had returned earlier than expected. "It seems our conversation must wait," Agatha said, rising from her chair with fluid grace. "But first, tell me honestly, do you wish to marry this man?" The directness of the question, so different from the careful euphemisms that had surrounded the entire arrangement, brought tears to Vivian's eyes. "No," she whispered. "I find him terrifying, the way he spoke yesterday, as if I were property to be acquired. I cannot imagine a life spent under his control." Agatha nodded grimly. "Then we shall ensure that such a life never comes to pass. But for now you must play your part. Go downstairs, smile prettily, and give no indication that anything has changed. Can you do that?" "I think so," Vivian replied, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. "Good. And remember, you are not powerless, no matter how circumstances may appear. We shall speak again this evening when the house is quiet." As Vivian made her way downstairs, her aunt's words echoed in her mind like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The drawing room was already occupied when she entered, the Duke standing near the fireplace with the casual authority of a man surveying his domain. He had dressed even more formally today, his black morning coat and perfectly knotted cravat suggesting the importance he placed on the day's proceedings. "Ah, Miss Ashford," he greeted her with that same cold smile. "How lovely you look this morning. I trust you slept well?" "Quite well, thank you, Your Grace," she lied smoothly, executing another perfect curtsy while fighting the urge to flee from his penetrating gaze. "Excellent. I have brought the marriage contracts for your father's review, along with a small token of my regard." He gestured toward an ornate jewelry box that sat open on the side table, revealing an elaborate diamond necklace that probably cost more than most families earned in a lifetime. The necklace was undeniably beautiful, but as Vivian looked at it, she could only think of the chains it represented. "It's magnificent, Your Grace. You are too generous." "Nonsense. A future duchess must be adorned appropriately." He moved closer, and Vivian caught the scent of his cologne, expensive and overpowering, like everything else about him. "Perhaps you would allow me to place it around your neck, a preview of our future together." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but Vivian forced herself to nod graciously. As the Duke's fingers brushed against her neck while fastening the clasp, she felt as if a noose were being tightened around her throat. The diamonds were cold against her skin, beautiful but lifeless, much like the future they represented. "Perfect," the Duke murmured, his hands lingering on her shoulders longer than propriety dictated. "You shall make a most satisfactory duchess, Miss Ashford." The word satisfactory struck her like a physical blow. Not beloved, not cherished, not even desired, merely satisfactory, like a piece of furniture that would serve its purpose adequately. "Your Grace," Charles interjected nervously, "perhaps we might review the contracts while the ladies become better acquainted." "Of course." The Duke's attention shifted to business matters with the swift efficiency of a man accustomed to treating all aspects of life as transactions. "I have taken the liberty of having my solicitors prepare everything in advance. The settlement will clear your debts entirely, with a generous allowance for household expenses going forward." As the men bent over the legal documents, Cordelia moved to Vivian's side, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You see how well he provides for you already? That necklace alone is worth more than most women see in a lifetime." "Yes," Vivian replied quietly, her fingers unconsciously touching the cold diamonds. "He is very generous. You must learn to appreciate such generosity, my dear. Men of the Duke's caliber expect gratitude and compliance in return for their protection and provision." The conversation continued around her, but Vivian found herself studying the Duke with new eyes, informed by her aunt's unexpected arrival and promise of alternatives. She noticed how he never asked for her opinion on any matter, how he spoke of their future home as if her preferences were irrelevant, and how his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at her. "The ceremony will take place at St. Thomas Church," the Duke announced, his tone brooking no discussion. "I have already spoken with the rector. A simple service followed by a modest reception here at your home before we depart for England." "Depart?" Vivian asked, the word escaping before she could stop herself. "How soon after the wedding?" "Immediately," the Duke replied, his grey eyes fixing on her with sharp attention. "I see no reason to delay our departure. You will have little need for extended farewells. Your new life awaits in England." The finality in his voice made Vivian's chest tighten with panic. Once she was in England, under his complete control and far from any potential allies, what hope would she have of ever reclaiming her freedom? "Of course," she managed to say, though her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. "I understand. Excellent. I do so appreciate a woman who grasps the practical necessities of marriage." The Duke's smile was sharp as a blade. "We shall deal very well together, Miss Ashford." As the afternoon wore on, Vivian felt as if she were watching her life being dismantled piece by piece, each decision made without her input, each plan laid without her consent. The Duke spoke of her future with the casual authority of ownership, while her father nodded along with the desperate gratitude of a man whose debts were being erased. When the Duke finally departed, promising to return the following day to escort her to the dressmaker for her wedding gown, Vivian remained in the drawing room, still wearing the diamond necklace that felt heavier with each passing moment. "You handled that beautifully, my dear," Cordelia said with satisfaction. "The Duke seems quite pleased with your demeanour." But as Vivian touched the cold stones at her throat, she could only think of her aunt's words. "You are not powerless, no matter how circumstances may appear." For the first time since this nightmare began, She dared to hope that perhaps there might be another path forward, one that didn't lead to a lifetime of elegant imprisonment in a foreign land. That evening, as the household settled into quiet, Vivian waited by her window for the promised conversation that might change everything. The grandfather clock in the hallway had just chimed 11 when Agatha slipped silently into Vivian's room, moving with the practiced stealth of someone accustomed to unconventional hours. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and a small oil lamp that cast dancing shadows across the walls as she settled into the chair beside Vivian's bed. "I trust the Duke's visit went according to his expectations," Agatha asked quietly, her eyes immediately drawn to the diamond necklace that Vivian still wore, as if she had forgotten it was there. "He brought contracts," Vivian replied, her fingers unconsciously touching the cold stones. "And this. He said a future duchess must be adorned appropriately." Agatha's expression darkened as she studied the elaborate piece. "May I?" When Vivian nodded, her aunt moved behind her to examine the clasp. "Exquisite craftsmanship, but notice how the setting is designed. Once fastened, it requires a specific technique to remove. Rather like a collar, wouldn't you say?" The observation sent a chill down Vivian's spine as Agatha deftly unfastened the necklace and set it aside. "I hadn't noticed," she admitted, rubbing her neck where the diamonds had rested. "Men like the Duke rarely do anything without purpose, my dear. Every gift, every gesture, every word is calculated to reinforce the dynamic he wishes to establish." Agatha opened her portfolio and withdrew several documents. "Which brings me to why I'm here." "You mentioned I had options," Vivian said, leaning forward eagerly. "What did you mean?" "I mean that your grandfather, in his wisdom, made provisions that your father has chosen not to share with you." Agatha spread the papers across the small table, her voice taking on the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to business matters. "You have an inheritance, Vivian, a substantial one, held in trust until your 21st birthday or marriage, whichever comes first." Vivian stared at the documents, her heart beginning to race. "An inheritance. But father said—" "Your father said many things that were not entirely accurate. The truth is that your grandfather distrusted Charles's financial judgment even then. He established a separate trust for you, administered by a bank in Boston, completely independent of your father's control." Agatha pointed to specific clauses in the legal text. "This inheritance includes not only money, but also property, a house in Boston that belonged to your mother's family, along with investments that have grown considerably over the years." "How much?" Vivian whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Enough to live independently for the rest of your life, if managed wisely. Enough to travel, to pursue education, to choose your own path entirely." Agatha's eyes gleamed with satisfaction at her niece's expression. "Your grandfather was quite specific in his instructions. This money was to ensure that you would never be forced into marriage for financial reasons." The implications crashed over Vivian like a wave. "Father knows about this?" "Of course he knows, but accessing your inheritance requires either your consent as an adult or your marriage, and a married woman's property becomes her husband's underlaw. Your father assumed you would marry young and conventionally, allowing him to negotiate favorable terms with your husband for managing the funds. But the Duke has no idea this inheritance exists. Your father has been very careful to present your family as financially dependent on this marriage. If the Duke knew you possessed independent means, he might reconsider the arrangement entirely. After all, he seeks a wife who will be grateful for his protection and provision, not one who could walk away at will." Vivian felt as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. "You're saying I could refuse this marriage? Simply refuse?" "I'm saying you have choices, my dear. But each choice comes with consequences that you must understand fully." Agatha leaned back in her chair, her expression growing serious. "If you claim your inheritance and refuse the marriage, your father's debts remain unpaid. He could lose this house, his social standing, everything he has built. The weight of responsibility settled on Vivienne's shoulders like a heavy cloak. So, I would be condemning my own family to ruin. Your father's poor investments condemned your family to ruin, Agatha corrected firmly. You would simply be refusing to sacrifice your life to remedy his mistakes. There is a significant difference. But Cordelia and father, they would never forgive me. Perhaps not, but forgiveness from those who would sell you into misery is hardly worth preserving, is it? Agatha's voice softened slightly. I know this is difficult, Vivienne. I faced a similar choice when I was not much older than you are now. My father wanted me to marry a man who would have crushed my spirit as surely as winter kills flowers. I chose freedom instead. And yes, it cost me my family's approval for many years. But it gave me a life worth living. Vivienne rose from her chair and moved to the window, looking out at the gas-lit street below, where a few late carriages still moved through the night. What would happen to me if I claimed the inheritance? Where would I go? You could come with me to Europe, see the world, receive a proper education at universities that accept women. Or you could remain in America. The house in Boston is quite lovely, and the city offers opportunities for an independent woman that New York society would never permit. Agatha joined her at the window. You could write, study, involve yourself in causes you believe in. You could wait for love to find you naturally, rather than accepting it as a business arrangement. And if love never comes, then you would still have a life of purpose and dignity, which is more than many women can claim. Agatha placed a gentle hand on her niece's shoulder. But I suspect love would find you, my dear. When a woman is free to be herself, she attracts those who appreciate her true nature rather than her social position. A soft sound from the hallway made both women freeze. Footsteps were approaching, slow, deliberate, and definitely masculine. Agatha quickly gathered her documents while Vivienne moved to her bed, both women adopting poses of innocent conversation as the footsteps paused outside the door. Miss Vivienne, Charles's voice came through the wood, uncertain and slightly slurred with brandy. I thought I heard voices. Just saying my prayers, Father, Vivienne called back, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'll be sleeping soon. The footsteps hesitated for a moment longer, then continued down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Both women remained motionless until they heard the distant sound of a door closing. He's been drinking more since the Duke's arrival, Vivienne whispered. I think he knows this arrangement is wrong, but he's too desperate to care. Desperation makes people capable of terrible choices, Agatha agreed quietly. But you are not desperate, Vivienne. You have options and you have time, though not much. The Duke expects to marry you within the fortnight. What must I do to claim the inheritance? Present yourself at the bank in Boston with proper identification and these documents. The trustees will verify your identity and transfer the funds to your control. Agatha handed her a sealed envelope. I've taken the liberty of writing a letter of introduction to the bank president. He knew your grandfather well and will ensure everything is handled properly. Vivienne took the envelope with trembling hands. And if I choose to go through with the marriage instead, then you will become the Duke's property in all but name, and your inheritance will become his to control. You will live in England, bear his children, and spend your life ensuring his comfort and advancing his ambitions. Agatha's voice was gentle but unflinching. You will be safe, well provided for, and utterly powerless to determine your own fate. The choice stretched before Vivienne like two diverging paths in a dark forest, one leading to security and subjugation, the other to freedom and uncertainty. As she looked at her aunt, she saw what a woman could become when she chose her own destiny. Confident, purposeful, alive in a way that seemed impossible within the constraints of conventional society. How long do I have to decide? The Duke returns tomorrow to escort you to the dressmaker. If you're going to act, it should be soon. Once the wedding preparations begin in earnest, it will become much more difficult to extract yourself gracefully. Agatha moved toward the door, then paused. Whatever you decide, Vivienne, make sure it's truly your choice. Don't let fear of disappointing others trap you in a life that will slowly kill your spirit. After her aunt had gone, Vivienne sat by her window until dawn, the envelope containing her future clutched in her hands. Outside, the city began to stir with the activities of a new day, and she wondered if she had the courage to step into the uncertain light of freedom, or if she would remain forever in the gilded shadows of expectation and duty. The diamond necklace lay forgotten on her dressing table, its cold brilliance a reminder of the beautiful cage that awaited her decision. The morning sun cast long shadows across Vivienne's bedroom floor as she sat at her writing desk. The envelope containing her inheritance documents spread before her like a map to an unknown country. She had not slept, her mind churning through every possible consequence of the decision that lay before her. The diamond necklace caught the early light from where it rested on her dressing table, its brilliance seeming to mock the darkness of her thoughts. A gentle knock interrupted her contemplation. "Come in," she called, expecting Martha with her morning tea. Instead, her father entered, his appearance disheveled and his eyes red-rimmed from what had clearly been a sleepless night of his own. Charles Ashford looked older than his 53 years, the weight of his financial failures etched into every line of his face. "Vivienne, my dear," he began hesitantly, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to speak with you before the Duke arrives. About yesterday, about everything that's happening." She turned to face him fully, noting how his hands trembled slightly as he approached her chair. "What about it, Father? I know this isn't what you dreamed of for your future," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "When your mother was alive, we used to talk about the kind of man you might marry someday, someone who would cherish you, who would see your intelligence and spirit as gifts rather than inconveniences." The mention of her mother brought tears to Vivienne's eyes. "Mother would have wanted me to be happy, wouldn't she?" "More than anything," Charles confirmed, his own voice breaking slightly. "She made me promise before she died that I would never force you into a marriage that would diminish you, and yet here I am doing exactly that." "Then why?" Vivienne asked, though she already knew the answer. Charles sank into the chair across from her, suddenly looking every one of his years. "Because I'm a coward, Vivienne. Because I made terrible investments, trusted the wrong people, and now I'm too proud to face the consequences of my failures. It's easier to sacrifice your happiness than to admit to the world that Charles Ashford is a fool who lost his family's fortune." The raw honesty in his confession surprised her. "Father—" "No, let me finish," he interrupted, holding up a shaking hand. "I know about your inheritance, Vivienne. I've always known. Your grandfather made sure I understood that you would never be dependent on my financial decisions, that you would have choices I never had." Vivienne felt her heart stop. "You know, I've known since the day the trust was established, and I've spent every day since hoping you would never need to use it, that I would be successful enough to provide for you properly." His laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. "Instead, I've created a situation where your only options are to save a father who doesn't deserve saving, or to marry a man who will treat you like property. Why didn't you tell me about the inheritance before? Because I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. Because I was ashamed that my daughter might need to rely on her grandfather's foresight rather than her father's provision." Charles met her eyes directly for the first time in weeks. "And because I was terrified that if you knew you had alternatives, you would choose them over helping me." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Vivienne studied her father's face, seeing not the confident patriarch she had known all her life, but a broken man who had gambled everything and lost. "What would you do, father, if I chose to claim my inheritance instead of marrying the Duke?" Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I would lose everything. The house, our social position, any hope of rebuilding what I've destroyed. Cordelia would leave me. She married me for security and status, not love. I would probably end up in debtor's prison or working as a clerk in some office, if anyone would hire a man my age. and you would hate me for it. No, he said firmly, looking up at her with surprising clarity. I would be proud of you for having the courage I lack. Your mother would be proud of you too. Before Vivian could respond, the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones announced the Duke's arrival. Charles rose from his chair, straightening his waistcoat with hands that still trembled. He's here, Charles said, unnecessarily. Vivian, whatever you decide, know that I love you. I've failed you in every way a father can fail a daughter, but my love for you has never wavered. Bridge, as her father left the room, Vivian quickly gathered the inheritance documents and tucked them into her reticule. Whatever happened in the next few hours, she wanted them close at hand. The Duke was waiting in the drawing room when she descended the stairs, resplendent in a dark blue morning coat that emphasized his imposing height. He rose as she entered, his grey eyes conducting their usual appraisal of her appearance. Miss Ashford, he greeted her with that familiar cold smile. How radiant you look this morning. Are you prepared for our expedition to the dressmaker? Of course, Your Grace, she replied, executing her customary curtsy while her mind raced with possibilities. Excellent. I've taken the liberty of selecting several designs that I believe will suit your new position admirably. He gestured toward a portfolio of fashion plates that lay open on the side table. As my Duchess, you will need to project an image of elegance and authority that befits our station. Vivian glanced at the designs, elaborate gowns that seemed designed more to restrict movement than to flatter the wearer. Each dress featured high necklines, long sleeves, and layers of fabric that would make even simple tasks cumbersome. They're very comprehensive, she managed to say. I believe in propriety, Miss Ashford. A woman's clothing should reflect her virtue and her husband's status, not cater to fleeting fashions or personal vanity. The Duke moved closer, his presence looming over her like a storm cloud. I trust you understand the importance of presenting yourself appropriately once we are married. I understand that you have very specific expectations, Your Grace. Indeed I do, and I'm pleased to see that you're beginning to grasp them. He offered her his arm with the mechanical courtesy of a man performing a social obligation. Shall we proceed? The dressmaker is expecting us, and I have several other appointments this afternoon. As they settled into the Duke's elaborate carriage, Vivian found herself studying his profile as he gazed out the window with the detached interest of a tourist. Everything about him radiated control and possession, from the way he had chosen her wedding dress without consulting her preferences to the casual manner in which he discussed their future as if her opinions were irrelevant. Your Grace, she said carefully, might I ask what you envision for our life together in England? Certainly. We will divide our time between my estate in Yorkshire and my London residence, depending on the social season and my business obligations. You will oversee the household staff, entertain my associates and their wives, and provide me with heirs to continue the family line. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. In your spare time, you may pursue appropriate feminine accomplishments, watercolor painting perhaps, or charitable work among the deserving poor. And if I wish to continue my education, to read literature or study history, the Duke turned to look at her directly, his grey eyes sharp with disapproval. Education beyond the basics is unnecessary for a woman in your position, Miss Ashford. Too much learning tends to make wives discontent with their natural roles. I prefer a woman who finds fulfillment in domestic harmony rather than intellectual pursuits. The casual dismissal of everything she valued most about herself hit Vivienne like a physical blow. In that moment, she saw her future with crystalline clarity, years of suffocating propriety, of having her thoughts and dreams slowly strangled by a man who viewed her intelligence as a character flaw to be corrected. I see, she said quietly, her hand unconsciously moving to her reticule where the inheritance documents rested. I'm glad you do. Many American women have difficulty adjusting to the more refined expectations of English society, but I believe you have the breeding necessary to adapt successfully. The Duke's smile was patronizing in its confidence. With proper guidance, you will make an adequate duchess. There was that word again, adequate, not beloved, not valued, not even respected, simply adequate, like a piece of furniture that would serve its purpose without causing trouble. As the carriage rolled through the busy streets of New York, Vivian made her decision. She would not spend her life being adequate for a man who saw her as nothing more than a well-bred broodmare. She would not sacrifice her dreams and intelligence on the altar of her father's financial failures. She would choose freedom, even if it meant disappointing everyone who claimed to love her. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do, "I'm afraid I must ask you to return me home immediately." The Duke's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I beg your pardon? I cannot marry you." Vivian continued, drawing strength from each word. "I'm grateful for your offer, truly, but I find that we are fundamentally incompatible in our expectations for marriage." For a moment, the Duke simply stared at her, as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Then his expression darkened with an anger that made her glad they were in a public carriage rather than a private room. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I believe you are suffering from pre-wedding nerves. Such feelings are natural in young women of delicate sensibilities." "I am not suffering from nerves, Your Grace. I'm making a rational decision based on careful consideration of what our marriage would entail." Vivian met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by his obvious displeasure. "I will not be returning to England with you." The Duke's mask of civilized courtesy finally slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath. "You seem to forget, Miss Ashford, that your family's financial survival depends on this union. Without my intervention, your father faces complete ruin." "I am aware of my father's situation," Vivian replied calmly. "But I will not sacrifice my life to remedy his poor judgment." "Then you are a selfish, ungrateful child who deserves whatever fate awaits her," the Duke snarled, his cultured accent sharpening with rage. "No decent man will have you now, not after you've broken an engagement to a duke. You'll end up a spinster, dependent on whatever charity your family can provide." "Perhaps," Vivian agreed serenely, "but I will be a free spinster, which seems infinitely preferable to being an imprisoned duchess." The remainder of the carriage ride passed in tense silence, the Duke's fury radiating from him like heat from a forge. When they arrived back at the Ashford mansion, he did not offer to help her down from the carriage, nor did he bid her farewell. He simply sat in rigid silence as she gathered her skirts and stepped onto the sidewalk. "You will regret this decision, Miss Ashford," he called after her as she walked toward the front door. "Mark my words, you will regret it bitterly." But as Vivienne climbed the steps to her family's home, her reticule heavy with the documents that would secure her freedom, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. She had chosen uncertainty over security, independence over protection, and her own dreams over everyone else's expectations. Now came the difficult part, facing her family and living with the consequences of her choice. 6 months had passed since Vivian Ashford walked away from the Duke of Ravenshollow and into an uncertain future that had proven far brighter than anyone could have imagined. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of her study in the elegant brownstone on Beacon Hill in Boston, illuminating the papers scattered across her mahogany desk. Correspondence from women's suffrage organizations, manuscripts from aspiring female writers seeking publication, invitations to lecture at various educational institutions throughout New England, and detailed plans for the charitable foundation she was establishing to support women's education. The house itself had been a revelation when she first arrived in Boston with Aunt Agatha by her side in late spring. Built by her maternal grandfather in the federal style during the 1820s, it possessed an understated elegance that spoke of old money and refined taste without the ostentatious display that characterized New York society. The brick facade was adorned with elegant white trim, and the interior featured high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and a library that had made Vivian weep with joy upon first seeing its floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with volumes on philosophy, literature, science, and history. More importantly than its beauty, however, was what it represented. It was hers, completely and unequivocally hers, along with the freedom it embodied. The transformation of her daily life had been nothing short of miraculous. Where once her mornings had been consumed with the tedious rituals of high society, receiving callers, planning elaborate dinners, and enduring fittings for increasingly restrictive clothing, she now spent her time engaged in work that fed her soul. She had established a small publishing venture specifically dedicated to promoting the works of female authors, and her desk was perpetually covered with manuscripts that arrived from across the country. Women who had been told their voices didn't matter were finally finding an audience, and Vivian took immense pride in being the conduit for their stories. Miss Ashford, called her secretary, Miss Eleanor Hartwell, a sharp-minded young woman from Radcliffe College who had become both assistant and friend over the past months. Eleanor possessed the kind of quick wit and fierce intelligence that would have been stifled in conventional society, but which flourished in the progressive atmosphere of Vivian's household. "Dr. Richardson has arrived for your appointment, and Mrs. Whitman from the Women's Educational Society is here as well. Shall I show them both into the drawing room?" Vivian looked up from the letter she had been composing to a women's college in Philadelphia, her face brightening with genuine pleasure. The letter concerned a scholarship fund she was establishing for young women of modest means who showed exceptional academic promise, a project that had become one of her most passionate endeavors. "Please show Dr. Richardson to the study and ask Mrs. Whitman to wait in the drawing room. I'll join her shortly. And would you ask Mrs. Murphy to prepare tea for 4? I believe Aunt Agatha will want to join us for our discussion about the new clinic." Dr. James Richardson entered the study with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in intellectual circles, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the October wind, and his brown eyes warm with the intelligence that had first caught Vivian's attention at a lecture on social reform 3 months earlier. At 31, he possessed the kind of quiet strength that came from dedication to meaningful work rather than social climbing. Unlike the Duke's cold calculation and predatory assessment, Dr. Richardson's presence brought warmth and energy to any room he entered, along with a genuine interest in the thoughts and opinions of everyone around him. "Miss Ashford," he greeted her with a smile that reached his eyes, removing his coat and hanging it on the stand near the door with the familiarity of someone who had become a regular visitor. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work. I know how busy you've been with the manuscript submissions." "Never," she replied, rising from her desk to greet him properly, noting how her heart lifted at his presence in a way that still surprised her with its intensity. "Your visits are always a welcome respite from correspondence, no matter how meaningful that correspondence might be. How did your meeting with the hospital board proceed? I've been anxious to hear their decision about the clinic." "Better than expected, actually. They've agreed to establish a clinic for working-class women and children, thanks in large part to your generous donation and that remarkably persuasive letter of support you wrote." Dr. Richardson's expression grew serious as he settled into one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace, his hands animated as he spoke about work that clearly meant everything to him. "I can't thank you enough for your advocacy, Vivian. These women desperately need medical care that they can afford, and your support made the difference between approval and rejection." The use of her given name still sent a small thrill through her. Not because it was improper, but because it represented the equality and mutual respect that had developed between them over months of friendship and collaboration. Dr. Richardson had never treated her as a delicate ornament to be admired from a distance, or as a source of financial support to be courted for her wealth, but as an intellectual equal whose opinions and contributions were valued for their own merit. Their conversations ranged from medical advances to social reform, from literature to philosophy, and he listened to her ideas with the same attention he would give to a respected colleague. "The pleasure is entirely mine, James," she replied, settling into the chair across from him and noting how natural it felt to use his given name, how right it seemed to have him in her private space. "It feels wonderful to use my inheritance for purposes that actually matter, rather than simply accumulating more luxury or maintaining social appearances. When I think of how that money might have been spent on elaborate gowns and jewelry to please a husband who saw me as property." She shuddered slightly at the thought, and Dr. Richardson's expression darkened with protective anger on her behalf. "That man was a fool who couldn't recognize treasure when it was offered to him," he said firmly. "His loss has been the world's gain, and mine, if I may be so bold." Before Vivian could respond to the warmth in his voice, Agatha entered the study with her characteristic grace and energy. At 62, she moved with the vitality of a woman half her age, her silver hair elegantly arranged and her traveling dress suggesting she had just returned from one of her frequent excursions around the city. Since arriving in Boston, Agatha had thrown herself into various reform movements with the enthusiasm of someone finally able to use her intelligence and resources without social constraints. "Dr. Richardson?" She greeted him warmly, her eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of someone who had spent the morning accomplishing meaningful work. "How delightful to see you again. I trust the hospital board proved more reasonable than we dared hope." "Indeed they did, Mrs. Ashford. Your niece's reputation for philanthropy and social reform has opened doors that might otherwise have remained firmly closed to a young physician with radical ideas about treating the poor." Dr. Richardson's admiration for Vivian was evident in his voice, and Agatha noted it with the pleased expression of someone whose matchmaking instincts were proving accurate. "Vivian has always possessed the rare combination of intelligence and compassion," Agatha replied, settling into her favorite chair near the window, where she could observe both her niece and their guest. "It's gratifying to see her using both qualities to such excellent effect. I've just returned from a meeting with the ladies organizing the suffrage rally next month. They're hoping Vivian will speak about the connection between education and political rights." "Will you?" Dr. Richardson asked, turning to Vivian with obvious interest. "Your essay on women's education was brilliant. Hearing you speak on the subject would be powerful." As Mrs. Murphy served tea with the quiet efficiency that characterized the well-run household, Vivian reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that terrifying morning when she had chosen freedom over security. The initial weeks had been difficult. Her father's rage when she announced her decision, Cordelia's cold fury at the loss of social elevation, and the whispered scandals that had followed her dramatic rejection of the Duke. New York society had buzzed with speculation about her motives, her sanity, and her prospects, with many predicting she would come crawling back within months, begging for forgiveness and a second chance. But as the weeks turned to months, she had discovered a world beyond the suffocating constraints of New York society, a world where her intelligence was an asset rather than a liability, where her opinions mattered, and where she could contribute to causes larger than herself. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Learning to manage her inheritance, establishing her independence, and navigating the complex world of social reform had required skills she'd never been taught. But with Agatha's guidance and her own determination, she had not only survived but thrived. "I received a letter from my publisher this morning," Vivian announced, unable to suppress her excitement as she set down her teacup. "They want to discuss publishing my essays on women's education as a book. They believe there's a significant audience for such work, particularly given the growing interest in educational reform." Dr. Richardson's face lit up with genuine pleasure, his brown eyes sparkling with pride and admiration. "Vivian, that's wonderful news. Your essay on the necessity of higher education for women was brilliant. It deserves the widest possible audience." The way you connected economic independence to intellectual development was particularly insightful. I can hardly believe it myself, she admitted, feeling a flush of pride that had nothing to do with social approval and everything to do with personal accomplishment. When I was engaged to the Duke, I never imagined I would be writing for publication, much less having my work taken seriously by established publishers. He made it quite clear that intellectual pursuits were inappropriate for women of my station. "The Duke's loss is the world's gain," Agatha observed dryly, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose advice had proven correct. "I shudder to think what would have become of your mind under his guidance. You would have been like a caged songbird, beautiful but silent." The mention of her former fiancé brought a shadow across Vivienne's features, though it was more thoughtful than pained. The raw hurt and humiliation had faded over the months, replaced by a profound gratitude for her escape and a clearer understanding of what she had almost lost. "I heard from Martha last week that he returned to England without finding another American bride," Vivienne said, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "Apparently, word of our broken engagement preceded him, and several families withdrew their daughters from consideration. The story of his expectations seems to have spread through society faster than he anticipated." "Good," Dr. Richardson said firmly, his protective instincts evident in his voice. "Any man who views marriage as a business transaction and women as property deserves to remain alone until he learns to see them as human beings deserving of respect and partnership." "Nah, I sometimes wonder if I was too harsh in my judgment," Vivienne mused, though her voice lacked real conviction. Perhaps he was simply a product of his upbringing and social expectations. Many men of his class are raised to view women as ornamental rather than intellectual companions. "Nonsense," Agatha interjected sharply, her eyes flashing with remembered anger. "You gave him every opportunity to show interest in your thoughts, your dreams, your personality. Instead, he made it abundantly clear that he valued only your breeding, your compliance, and your potential as a decorative addition to his household. A man's upbringing may explain his attitudes, but it doesn't excuse them, particularly when he shows no interest in growth or change." Dr. Richardson leaned forward in his chair, his expression earnest and passionate. "Vivienne, you made the right choice. I've seen what happens to intelligent women who marry men who don't value their minds. They slowly fade away, becoming shadows of themselves, their spirits crushed by years of being told their thoughts don't matter. You're too vibrant, too brilliant, too alive to have survived such a fate." The warmth in his voice and the admiration in his eyes made Vivienne's heart flutter in a way that was entirely different from the cold dread she had felt in the Duke's presence. Over the past months, she had come to treasure Dr. Richardson's friendship, his respect for her intellect, his genuine interest in her opinions and dreams, and the way he made her feel valued for who she truly was, rather than what she represented. "Speaking of choices," Dr. Richardson continued, his voice taking on a slightly nervous quality that was entirely unlike his usual confident demeanor, "I was hoping to discuss something with you. Something personal." Agatha rose from her chair with the practiced grace of a woman who recognized a moment that required privacy, her eyes twinkling with knowing satisfaction. "I believe I'll check on Mrs. Murphy's preparations for dinner and perhaps review the correspondence that arrived this afternoon. Please excuse me." She paused at the door, looking back with a smile that suggested she had been expecting this moment for some time. After her aunt had departed, Dr. Richardson moved to the chair closer to Vivienne's, his brown eyes serious but warm, with an emotion that made her breath catch. The afternoon light streaming through the windows caught the auburn highlights in her hair and illuminated the intelligence in her green eyes that had first captivated him months ago. "Vivienne," he began, his voice soft but steady, "these past months of friendship have been the happiest of my life. Your intelligence, your compassion, your courage in choosing your own path, everything about you inspires me to be a better man, to work harder for the causes we both believe in." Vivienne felt her breath catch as she recognized the direction of his words, her heart beginning to race with a mixture of hope and nervousness. "James, please, let me finish," he said gently, reaching for her hands with a tenderness that spoke of deep respect and affection. "I know you've only recently escaped one unwanted engagement, and I would never presume to pressure you into another commitment before you're ready. But I wanted you to know that I've fallen deeply in love with you, not with your inheritance or your social position, but with your mind, your heart, your spirit, your passionate commitment to making the world better." The contrast with the Duke's cold proposal could not have been more stark. Where the Duke had spoken of duty and propriety, of her role as an ornament to his status, Dr. Richardson spoke of love and partnership. Where the Duke had sought to diminish her, to mold her into his vision of appropriate femininity, Dr. Richardson celebrated everything that made her unique and encouraged her to grow even further. "I love you too, James," she said softly, the words feeling as natural as breathing, as right as the morning sun streaming through her windows. "I think I have for weeks, but I was afraid to acknowledge it, even to myself. After the Duke, I wasn't sure I could trust my judgment about men, or whether I even wanted to risk my independence for love." His face transformed with joy as he brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then you would consider someday when you're ready the possibility of marriage? A true partnership between equals, where your dreams matter as much as mine, where your work is as important as my own?" "I would consider it," she replied, her heart soaring with a happiness she had never imagined possible. "In fact, I believe I'm considering it right now. But I need you to understand, I won't give up my work, my writing, my independence. I've fought too hard for them." "I wouldn't want you to," Dr. Richardson said earnestly. "The woman I love is the one who publishes essays on women's rights, who establishes scholarships for deserving students, who speaks at rallies for social reform. I want to support your work, not replace it with domestic duties." Dr. Richardson's laugh was pure delight as he squeezed her hands gently. "Then I am the luckiest man in Boston, perhaps in all of America. Will you marry me, Vivienne? Will you be my partner in all things?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, with growing confidence. "Yes, I will marry you, James Richardson." As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of her study, Vivienne marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been trapped in a golden cage, destined for a life of elegant imprisonment with a man who saw her as property. Now she sat in her own home, surrounded by work that mattered, loved by a man who valued her mind as much as her heart, and free to choose her own destiny. A soft knock at the door interrupted their moment, and Eleanor entered with a telegram in her hand, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Miss Ashford, but this just arrived from New York. It's marked urgent." Vivienne accepted the telegram with some trepidation, her happiness dimming slightly as she recognized her father's handwriting in the address. She opened it quickly, her eyes scanning the brief message, while Dr. Richardson waited patiently beside her. "What is it?" he asked gently, noting the complex emotions playing across her features. "It's from my father," she replied, her voice thoughtful rather than distressed. "He says that Cordelia has left him, as we expected she would once the money was gone. He's lost the house and most of his remaining possessions, but he also says—" She paused, reading the message again to make sure she understood correctly. "He says he's proud of me for having the courage he lacked, and that he's found work as a bookkeeper in Philadelphia. He wants to know if he might visit sometime, to apologize properly, and to meet the woman his daughter has become." Dr. Richardson squeezed her hands gently, his expression understanding. "How do you feel about that?" Vivienne considered the question carefully, examining her heart for any lingering resentment or pain. The anger had faded over the months, replaced by a sadness for the man her father had become, and a hope that perhaps it wasn't too late for redemption. "I feel hopeful," she said finally. "Perhaps it's never too late for people to change, to choose courage over comfort. He made terrible mistakes, but he's acknowledging them now. That's more than many people ever do. And if he disappoints you again, then I'll survive it," she replied with quiet confidence that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, and that happiness doesn't depend on other people's approval or support. It depends on living authentically, on choosing love over fear, and on never allowing anyone else to define your worth." As evening approached, they were joined by Agatha and Mrs. Whitman from the Women's Educational Society, and the conversation turned to plans for the upcoming suffrage rally and the expansion of educational opportunities for women. Dr. Richardson listened with genuine interest as the women discussed strategy and logistics, occasionally offering insights from his own experience with social reform movements. "You know," Mrs. Whitman said as the meeting concluded, "seeing you two together gives me hope for the future. A marriage based on mutual respect and shared values, where both partners support each other's work. That's what we're fighting for, isn't it? The right for women to choose partners who see them as equals rather than property." As their guests departed and the household settled into evening quiet, Vivienne and Dr. Richardson sat together in the drawing room, planning their future with the excitement of two people who had found not just love, but true partnership. "When shall we marry?" Dr. Richardson asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sun set over Boston Harbor. "Soon," Vivienne replied, leaning into his warmth. "But I want a simple ceremony, something that celebrates our commitment rather than displaying wealth or status. And I want to keep my name professionally. I've worked too hard to establish my reputation as a writer and reformer to give it up now." "Of course," he agreed without hesitation. "I want you to be exactly who you are, Vivienne Ashford. That's the woman I fell in love with." As the sun set over Boston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Vivienne Ashford sat in her own home, surrounded by her own choices, contemplating a future bright with possibility. She had traded the certainty of a duke's protection for the uncertainty of freedom, and in doing so had discovered that the greatest security came not from another person's provision, but from her own courage to live according to her deepest values. The diamond necklace that had once felt like a collar now rested in a jewelry box upstairs, a reminder of the beautiful cage she had escaped. In its place, she wore a simple gold locket that had belonged to her mother, a symbol of love freely given rather than compliance demanded. Outside her window, the city of Boston hummed with the energy of progress and possibility, and Vivienne smiled as she contemplated the book she would write, the causes she would champion, the love she would nurture with a man who saw her not as property to be acquired, but as a partner to be cherished. Tomorrow she would write to her father, offering him the chance to rebuild their relationship on new terms. She would continue her work with the suffrage movement, expand her publishing venture, and plan a wedding that would celebrate equality rather than submission. She had chosen her own path, and it had led her home to herself and to a love that honored everything she was and everything she hoped to become. What an incredible journey we've witnessed together. From the suffocating constraints of Gilded Age society to the liberating power of choosing one's own destiny, Vivienne's story reminds us that true freedom comes not from security or approval, but from the courage to live authentically. If this tale of transformation and triumph resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of remarkable individuals who dared to defy expectations and forge their own paths. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these inspiring historical dramas that celebrate the power of human courage and determination. What did you think of Vivienne's choice? Would you have had the courage to walk away from security for the sake of freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives on these timeless themes of love, courage, and self-determination. And if you enjoyed this story, you might also love our other tales of strong individuals who refuse to let society define their worth. Like this video, if Vivian's journey inspired you, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to choose courage over comfort. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through history. Until next time, remember, your life is your own to write, and the most beautiful stories often begin with the courage to turn the page.